Okay. Hi. So I picked a documentary called Abducted in Plain Sight. It's about in 1974, 12-year-old Jan Broberg is abducted from a small church-going community in Idaho by a neighbor and close family friend. Um, I chose it because I recently went and watched that movie Black Phone in theaters with Ethan Hawke, and it really stuck with me for a few days after watching it. Like, I was at work and the movie just kept popping into my head at work. It was really disturbing to me. The movie ends up being he's a serial killer. He kidnaps these kids, and it's around the same time period, like in the 70s. And so it was really creepy because they had no, like in the news recently, or the last few months, or this last year, those people, those children that were kidnapped, and then they were, uh, by a miracle, found alive. Well, that one little girl in Australia that was found, she was kidnapped by that Aboriginal man, I believe. Um, so I chose this one, Abducted in Plain Sight, about this little girl Jan who gets very brainwashed by her neighbor and close family friend. Um, his name is Bob, so they call him B. And when he grooms the entire family. It's pretty what it was described as jaw-dropping documentary. And at first I thought I wasn't gonna be able to stick with it, but then after I watched the whole thing, it was a good one. Yeah, it is very jaw-dropping. He grooms the entire family, and he brainwashes the little girl, and she stays brainwashed until she's well into her teen years. She refuses. She listens to what he tells her to do. So when he kidnaps her, he takes her down to Mexico. Um, so they were supposed to be gone for. It was strange. It was just supposed to be him and her. They were supposed to go on like a horseback riding trip, and it's just one daughter. They have three daughters, and he asked to just take the one daughter. And they have their own kids too. Like, they were pretty close families. But he takes just the one daughter, and they didn't have time for it. And they said, well, I could pick her up from her piano lesson. And she begged, and they said, yeah. And so they kidnapped her, and I don't really... They spoke about it several times during the kidnapping, but he drugs her, but he covers himself in blood in the car, because, she's willingly with him, but I think he staged something in his own car. It was just kind of strange, but he ends up taking off with her, and they go down to Mexico, and she comes to in the RV, and she says there's this voice speaking to her, and she's like tied to the bed, which in another part doesn't really make sense, because she's tied to a bed is what she said. She was strapped to the bed, or she was just laying on a bed, but it was moving, and there was a box next to her that was speaking to her, and it was telling her that, at first she thought she was abducted by aliens, and then sure enough, the box was telling her, you are part alien. And so this is how he brainwashed her. He brainwashed her into believing she was half human, half alien. Her mom was her mom, and her dad was not her dad. And he tells her, the names, like common names that people use for aliens are Zeta, two Z names. They start with Z's. And he says they're on a mission, and their mission is to repopulate this planet, or to save this planet, and the only way to do that is if she's pregnant by age 16. And then they told her that there's a male companion at the front of the RV, and it tells her to go to him, go see him. And so she walks up to the RV. See, this is where I thought she was strapped down, but I guess she wasn't. She walks up there, and it turned out to be B, or Bob. And she wakes him up, and he's covered in the blood that they were talking about at the beginning of the documentary. Like, he had staged it. There was blood in the car that the FBI found. I don't know. But he was covered in blood, and I think he was fake sleeping. And so, because it had to have been him talking through the box. But she goes and she wakes him up, and she's already convinced that this has to happen. because he's talking about aliens too, and she's talking about aliens, and they're gone for like 35 days or more. And the first 2 weeks, she said she didn't even realize how much time had actually passed. And so they're down in Mexico, Mazatlan, Mexico, and they have the FBI. He contacts someone back home, and he tells them that they have to convince the family to let him marry her, otherwise he won't come back to America. Because he said down in Mexico they can get married legally because she's age 12. But in America, if he comes back to America, he's going to be arrested on the spot. And the family said, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to let him do that. And so the guy, he calls the FBI and he says, look, this is what he's saying. And he tries to get him help. And so they contacted their contact. I forget what the specific word was. Starts with an A. I think it's an important word that they use. I've heard it before. I can't remember. It's an important word. I've never heard it used in this context before. So that's what I found interesting about it. I can find it. Anyways, so they're down there, and they find their contact or whatever the FBI does, and they storm the Mexican police storm where they're at. Where are they? They're in a hotel or something. They storm the hotel and they take them to the police, and so they all cram into this little car, she said, and they go to this police station, and the Mexican police allow her, they bring her down to this lower level of the police station, and they allow her to talk to the man that they just arrested and rescued this little girl. This is back in the day. They didn't really say the time. It says right there, 1974. But they allow her to talk to him, and he sits there as they're talking with the cell in between them. He's brainwashing her for when they go back to America, and it works because she's brainwashed the whole time. She does exactly what he says. And the reason why the documentary was so shocking or jaw-dropping is because it happens twice. He kidnaps her 2 times. So the first time he kidnaps her, he grooms the whole family. And what I mean by he grooms the whole family, he starts a kissing. At first it started off with kissing, but after the second kidnapping, they moved to sexual intercourse with the wife, with her mother. And then with the father, he admits that they were in a car and they were driving around, and this guy, Bob B, was complaining about not getting enough from his wife. And the guy's telling the story, and he's saying, he's sitting there, they're giggling, they're laughing, and the guy's like, this is just kid stuff, and you can see that he's sexually aroused, and he asks him to relieve him. He asks Jan's dad to relieve him, and the guy, he calls himself foolish. He says it's the stupidest thing he's ever done, but he reaches over and he mutually masturbates Bob. And then it goes quickly into Bob talks about how he went out of his way to start a homosexual relationship with Jan's father and the mother just so he can get to their daughter, just so he can get that much closer to them. And that's how he started. But then, so she's back, and it's a little while longer, and they keep talking again. So the mom starts to have a sexual affair with him, and the dad goes and asks the bishop what he should do, and the bishop says, your wife is on a bad path. And so what he got from that was to serve her divorce papers. So he just served her divorce papers to be legally separated, and that he was taking the kids, and she had to leave the house because she was sleeping with the guy that kidnapped their daughter. And the guy he didn't go to jail for what long time. He was charged and stuff, but he was out long enough to kidnap her the second time. So the second time he comes to the window, they plan it. He comes to the window. Oh, so one of the brainwashing things was he said that he would come after her sister Susan. They still had their mission to get pregnant. He would come after Susan. He would kidnap. He would join if she couldn't get pregnant. And Karen, he would call. The aliens would make her go blind. So that was the threat. And there was those were the threats against her family that she later understood. But what was that word? So he kidnaps her. He meets her. This was in Idaho. So he meets her at the window. She goes to climb out her window, and he's outside her window, and he grabs her, and she's gone for a long time. And the FBI had set up a recorder at the family's home because B was still calling the mom. So the mom got back into the house. Wait, there's a whole story. So she leaves. So they're separated. The family's separated, and then the mom and the dad have a talk, and they get back together because she says she had like a 7-month affair with the kidnapper, and then they go back together, and then this is when the girl allows herself to be kidnapped again. She runs away because she's still very, very brainwashed, and she won't talk about any of the stuff that happened to him. And so they get kidnapped, and he's pretending like he has no contact with her, but when she calls, she doesn't call at all. She calls like one time, and they ask her, have you had any contact with him? And she's pretty quick in her responses. They recorded them, and she said, yeah, I talked to him like 2 weeks ago, which makes sense, because once you find out where they put her, so they find him, the second kidnapping occurs before the trial occurs, and so he gets sentenced. He only serves 10 days for what he did, and he moves to Salt Lake City to live in his RV, and then he disappears. Meanwhile, the little girl is gone. She's been missing for a while, and they don't know how to find him, but he keeps calling the house, and they tell the mom that had an affair with him to keep taking those phone calls, and so they were recording all those phone calls, and after a while they find him, and they just surveillance him, and one day he goes to a payphone in, I think this was Utah, California, and he goes to a payphone, and he makes a phone call. He's on the phone for like 10 to 12 minutes and he hangs up, and they walk over there, and there's a phone book that's opened up, and he had written down a phone number on there, and so they take that phone number, they call the phone number, and it rings to a Catholic school, an all-girls Catholic school, and they tell them what's going on, and they're like, no, there's no one here by that name, and they have to ask and ask and ask and ask, and they have to explain the situation over and over and over again, and finally they figure out that she was enrolled under Janice Toplin, or Tobler, so there's the T, and when they go there, it turns out that he enrolled her. He said that he was a CIA agent, and that if people come here looking for her, that they are not to tell them anything, because these are the bad guys that are after him, and it was during she said the Lebanese war, and so they believed him. And anyway, so they told him that they were the FBI, and she had been kidnapped two times, and they take her out of the Catholic school, and I think they arrested him. But they anyway, so they arrested him, and then it goes to, she was worse this time. When she got home, she pushed her family farther away, and she was saying that the little girl that was once there is no longer there anymore. That person was completely gone. And later, not too long later, their family store burns down, and turns out that the guy, when he was in jail, he had convinced 2 other inmates to go. He said he'd pay them $1,000 each to go burn down their store and burn down their house, but they only got the store. And those guys ended up being convicted of that crime. And so then after the years pass, the mom writes a book, but she started writing the book in the 90s, and it took them a while to actually start talking about it. Because she started writing in the 90s, and she had it published in 2003 is when she finished it. And she would talk to her daughter, and she would ask her interview-like questions, and so finally she started answering these questions. When she finally realized that she had been brainwashed was when she went to this acting camp, this performance arts camp. And she was there, and this boy asked her a question, and she just felt so wrong, like that wasn't supposed to be happening. She wasn't allowed to do this. And her first thought was, are the aliens still watching me? Are they still there? Do I still have this mission to go and do? And then immediately the thought that pops into her head was, of course they are. They always are. And so she made this plan to tell her 2 sisters about the plan the next day. This was going to happen the next day. And she was going to get a gun. And the end result was, if she couldn't fulfill the mission, she would kill herself. But she would first tell them. She woke up the next morning, and she said something along the lines of, like, everything, it was different. Like, she realized that she was brainwashed, and life didn't have to be like that anymore. And so that's when she started opening up, because she went and told one of her sisters, and her sister said, you need to talk to mom and dad right now. You need to tell them. And it took them a while to, I don't know what the sister was saying, something like they don't want to hear that, but they listened anyways. I don't know what the sister was talking about at that part, but anyway, so they start talking about it, and then as they go to these where she goes and she does public speaking about the book that they wrote and about her experience, she says, I was kidnapped by a family friend and neighbor and severely brainwashed. And during one of her speakings, there are these bikers. It's a biking group, Bikers Against Child Abuse. This guy shows up, and he starts clashing with them. And it got so bad that she had to file for a stalking injunction, not a stalking order. And normally they're for 3 years, but she got it for life. And what was unbelievable to me was in the courtroom, the guy was allowed, so they're sitting side by side, and the judge is up front. He's allowed to ask her questions, and she's answering them. And he was asking her questions about, like, they said that you told ABC that you were going to make a movie. And she said, no, I said that because of this book, there could be potential requests for something like that. How they normally do, like maybe like Lifetime or something like that. And then he asks another question and another question. It's a total of like 4 questions. And during that back and forth questioning, he's like, oh, it's just so creepy because he's a known child abuser and pedophile, and it's just so creepy. And he ends up they end up convicting him on all of it, and he ends up killing himself. He ends up taking a bunch of pills and killing himself, so he never has to go to jail ever again. That's what he said. And it's really it was a really good one. I chose that one. It does go into detail about her rape. It's really sad. But I chose it because of the recent movie that's in theaters right now, Black Phone. It's about child kidnappings and murder about a serial killer who kidnaps kids.